We're excited to have you stay with us this morning on Breakfast Central. It's TGIF edition, which means, thank God it's Friday, the weekend is here. Let's take you to our big roundup, which is the East Africa roundup, and we are talking with our man Darren, who joins us. Good morning to you, and thank you so much for being here this morning.
Good morning. You love weekends, huh?
We all love weekends from this part of the world, and I'm sure you love weekends as well.
I don't.
Oh, you don't? Oh, wow, interesting.
Did he say?
Yeah, he said he doesn't.
Or
he said he doesn't.
I don't love weekends.
Why?
You become broke. You make money when you're working, and weekends there's no work.
Wow.
Anyway, let's get into it. Let's have the roundup very quickly. Let's talk about Raila Odinga. He's making the headlines every day, every single day, and he's saying that he's going back into the protest while still having conversations, of course, with William Ruto. Can you elaborate on the recent statement by Raila Odinga, the leader of the Azimio now Module 1, regarding the possibility of renewed demonstrations and the likes?
Now, yesterday, Azimio Lamoja, party and Raila Odinga had a town hall meeting for the first time since they had stopped the protests. And in there, he addressed some very important things, including the team. They announced actually their team that is going to be representing them in the talks between the party and the government. And the government, of course, also has their team that they had already fielded, but they just hadn't yet selected their vice chairperson who's going to be leading the other team to see that these talks happen. However, Raila points out issues that things like delay to even select their leader, a person who's going to be leading their team to hold this discussion, is one of the things that they are very unserious about having these talks. And according to him, that these, the delays and making it unserious is one of the tactics to, kind of stop the agenda of the Azimio la Umoja. And another thing he also points out, he says that the government party is just trying to ensure that they are the ones who are dictating what they are going to discuss about. Yet the Azimio la Umoja were very, very loud about 4 things, and one of them includes electing members of the Electoral Commission Board, 2, the high cost of living, 3, opening the servers to the public so that people know what exactly had transpired in the election period of time. But you see that the other party doesn't want to discuss any of those things. It's alleged, according to Raila Odinga, they only want to discuss how do they select members of the electoral board. So it's something he says, no. They want to be the ones to determine on what grounds they're going to discuss in case the talks happen. But in case they sense that these talks are unserious, they're going to go back to the streets and protest. And this, he promised that after the holy month of Ramadan, in case these talks, according to him, are unserious and they do not address any of those grounds, they're going back on the streets. That pushes the government in a position whereby it now looks like Raila has them in his hands. He's put them in a corner where he exactly wants them to be. And it's now going to take more than just these talks to ensure that the protests don't happen. I sense more conversations from the region. It may end up involving leaders like Museveni and the other East African leaders to see that they come and bring down these 2 members and agree on something that is going to bring calm to the country, which is not so likely, not so likely because, again, Raila, first of all, if the first time he had these talks, the moment he accepted to hold on the protests and have these talks, that was already a sign that he can actually go ahead and have conversations with the president. And there are so many predictions around it that maybe he has his own personal interest, and once Ruto grants him his personal interest, then that will be the end of it. But where does it leave the people who he is representing? Example, the people who are fighting for the cost of living.
Man, so many angles to look at this conversation.
So many.
And at the end of the day, it's the people of Kenya that have to suffer for this. They say when the 2 elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. And I hope that these two leaders can put their differences aside and reach an amicable agreement, because lives have been lost with these protests. But let's move away from Kenya for a bit and head to another conversation. Tanzania and Burundi have put out a request for proposals for the design and construction of an electrified railway that will initially connect the two nations and pass through the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, how will this boost trade in the East African region, and what have been the challenges in building the SGR from Mombasa to Kampala?
Now, right from the 1970s, there was already a discussion between the East African states, first of all, to form one state. I'm just giving you a background. And one of the four pillars that was in there was intertrade, to ensure that there's free movement of goods within East Africa. And at that time, it was only Uganda, Tanzania, and Kenya who formed the members of the East African bloc. And slowly, after it collapsed actually in the 1980s, and then it was again brought back in the 2000s, early 2000s, late 90s into 2000s, and the conversation to revive the East African bloc came through bringing on countries like Rwanda and Burundi, who joined later. The same four pillars stayed. And the only way they realized that we can only achieve this bloc can have its purpose if one thing we get right is the trade. And fast forward, there were agreements that were made to build rail lines. There was one that was, in fact, the other year, about 4 years ago, Kenya completed its standard gauge railway from Mombasa to Nairobi, coming close to Naivasha, and Tanzania was supposed to do the same, building a rail network that connects the other countries like Uganda, Burundi, and Rwanda. That some of them have delayed, but this is a step forward, and it gives hope that now the project is starting to happen. What that means is that the 282-kilometer rail network that is going to also have an electrified gauge on it will be connecting a new country into the bloc, which is DRC, and DRC has been looked at as a very big potential market, but not only East Africa, but also the African Continental Free Trade Area. That is going to be one of the most busiest routes in case this standard gauge rail is constructed. And we see countries, making countries like Burundi, which are very low at export because of their issues, road networks, and also political issues. We see them being able to export at least $100 million a year. That is just a projection, but they may be around 60 at worst case scenario if things go bad. For now, they're really doing bad. In fact, it's the country with the least GDP, I think, after South Sudan. So it's going to boost trade within that area, but also the biggest picture here is the African Continental Free Trade, which is going to be the biggest in the world in case all agreements have been signed and agreed that goods can move within African continent freely and so easily. So that the biggest goal is the African Continental Free Trade, but now the secondary objective is also boosting the East African trade if it happens with the rail lines.
That's a good one. I think that's one thing that Africa has indeed not benefited from. We're blessed and rich in resources, and one of the challenges has been cross-border, being able to ensure that we all have a feel, we all have a cross-trade, so to say, and benefit from different parts of Africa, from different parts of the continent. But my worry, very quickly, Darren, we have another guest we'd like to also introduce to you, by the way. Very quickly. Yeah, we're coming. Very quickly. Is there no fear or worry concerning the current crisis that is bedeviling DR Congo and how this intertrade between Burundi and Tanzania will take place? Are there no fears concerning the current crisis?
Of course, there are fears. One of them, the most important one, has always been funding. It has happened to Kenya. It has happened to Uganda. Kenya is still paying the debts to Chinese for the standard gauge rail line. Uganda had to cancel a deal with one of the Chinese constructors and now went for the Turkish one. And this is the same thing that is going to happen to the one in Tanzania to Burundi via Congo. So the problem will be funding and the timing. But also too, because Congo has so many rebel groups that are hindering kind of the construction and development of, of the country itself. They may face challenges on the routes. Where do we pass where it is safer to make sure that we get into Congo and to Kinshasa, to Central African Republic, and going westwards. In terms of, so the biggest issue here is security. But with the East African force, standby force put in place, you just never know. It may go well, it may not go well. I mean, just look at the example of a rail line from Mombasa to Uganda, which has failed even when there's no insecurity issues just in the neighborhood, between the two countries. So it's one of those things that you may fear the rebel group activities, but the issue has always been funding and also implementing work in terms of good work or shoddy work.
Well said. I mean, we hope that these socio-economic policies and this trade as well. Yeah, go on.
Let me give you an example. In Uganda, they had repaired the rail lines, and then they procured the wrong specifications of the train to work on those rail lines. It was the funniest thing ever, but yeah, that's one of the things that you expect.
And who takes the fall for that? Does anybody actually take the fall for that?
Can you beat that?
Well,
there were no consequences.
Exactly. Is why we can be having conversations like that. We need to have systems and structures that ensure that there are consequences for actions. Else, we'll be having conversations about rail line and rails not fitting, or iron sheets that people have used for their own personal communities, or iron sheets that were not assigned to them. But that's a conversation for another day. Darren, would like to introduce you to someone, and I'll have Joe do the honors. Whilst we've done the East African roundup, we'd like to have the roundup from South Africa, and for the very first time we have a new guest, and I'll have Joe do the honors.
All right. Anyway, it's my pleasure to tell you, Darren, that you're not alone in this race with us on Breakfast Central every Fridays. We've come to make it even more colorful as we have joined to the fold. I'd like to welcome him, ladies and gentlemen, and of course to our man who's here with us, Darren. Would like to make welcome Tebogo Makoto. He will be taking us on the Southern Africa roundup, but he's not starting today. Today is just for introductions because time is fast spent. Tebogo, welcome. Thank you for joining us on Breakfast Central. Truly African color, and it's good to see you here.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to have joined Breakfast Central. I'm excited in terms of working with you guys as well and really unpacking what's happening in Southern Africa.
Great.
Absolutely amazing.
Darren, how do you feel? You have your colleague now, a counterpart who's handling the southern part while you take on the eastern part.
I even thought Joe was going to say, Darren meet Tebogo, Tebogo meet Darren.
Okay, all right. Oh, that sounds really good. Darren meet Tebogo, Tebogo meet Darren.
Tebogo, nice meeting you. And here's the interesting thing that I've seen about Tebogo. He's a radio presenter. I do radio as well. I do TV and radio, so I see he does radio as well. So come on, nice meeting you. We're gonna catch up.
Let me also give you an interesting fact. I started off as a radio presenter.
I worked on radio as well. That makes the four of us.
That's it.
You see,
The network is so bad right now. I'm unable.
Tebogo,
I'm unable to hear you clearly currently. Unfortunately, we are having technical difficulties.
But I'm sure we'll sort that out before next week Friday, so we can have this fresh conversation together. I'm sure.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys.
Absolutely.